My name is Jean-Michel Kantor. I'm from Paris Institut Mathématique de Jussieu, and the title of my talk is Artificial Science and Conscience in Lem's Work and Now. I want first to thank the organizer for this invitation for a virtual visit to Krakow. I am a mathematician, and in the recent years, since the 80s, I have been working on history of mathematics and philosophical questions. First, by writing a book which is connected with the topic of my talk, whose name is Naming Infinity, a true story of religious mysticism and mathematical creativity. This is a book I wrote with Lauren Graham, historian of science at Harvard University. And more recently, I turned to artificial intelligence, and I wrote a book which is not yet published called Artificial Intelligence Between Golem and Pygmalion. Where is leading us artificial intelligence? I will come back to these two words, Golem and Pygmalion. Looking for conclusion on the future of artificial intelligence for my book, I found some references in Lem's work and realized it was a huge continent of writing very poorly known, in particular in France. See, for example, the Wikipedia note on Lem, which is very complete in English, mentioning his Jewish family origin and the whole content of science fiction books and philosophical and historical discussion about cybernetics and artificial intelligence, whereas the French Wikipedia note is just mentioning the non-science fiction publication and even not his Jewish origin. So it's really a scandal, this very short note which is mentioning only the science fiction books. So I was also fascinated by the real precursory visions, sometimes many years before current research and discussion and thoughts on the limits of artificial intelligence in Lem's papers and books. In fact, the translations of his books has been very late, none in French, as I said, and for example, Summa Technologiae, which I will call ST, the fundamental book for our purpose, was published in English after 50 years before the translation appeared. I will first make some remarks on names and namings, which are important concepts in general and in the field of AI, and also in relation with Lem's work and Lem's vocabulary, as we will see. Then I will say a few words about Lem in connection with our subject. I guess I don't need to give a detailed summary of Lem's life and Lem's works in front of this audience. And then, if I have time, I will mention his book Golem 14 also. I will make, in the way, some partial comparison with current discussion and research in Western European AI activities. Then I will make some final remarks on the lesson we can get from Lem's globalized point of view and Lem's philosophy. I rely on various documents, in particular the book by Peter Swirsky and the book by Paweł Majewski, Between an Animal and a Machine, Stanisław Lem's Technological Utopia. And I also want to thank my friend and colleague Eric Lambert, who has been very helpful in my research. So names and namings. It is well known and considered for many centuries that names have importance and power on the object they represent. This is already the central ideas in Plato's Cratylus Dialogue in 4th or 5th century BC. But even earlier, if you think about Genesis, the Bible, Genesis, it starts with God said, let there be light, and there was light. So God named the thing before it was created. And according to Genesis again, God named man, gave man the right to name all the animals. In fact, a similar phenomenon occurred in a completely different period and subject with between light and the creation of infinities in the end of 19th century. The theory of sets was really the creation of infinities by their names. See our book with Lauren Graham. Concerning artificial intelligence, if we ask where does the word come from, then the story starts in 1956 in Dartmouth, United States, which was the place of birth of artificial intelligence. And it saw the choice of the name during a discussion, and the name was proposed by John McCarthy for the title of the project they were submitting, which was the beginning of artificial intelligence. Few reasons have been given to explain this choice, which was an obvious anthropomorphic connotation in it. Now, Stanisław Lem has created a complete separate vocabulary for the main object of artificial intelligence and cybernetics and connected technology. He used the word intellectronics to replace artificial intelligence. This was not his invention, but he created a crowd of new words, each time trying to compose with using the technological flavor of the thing the machine he was thinking of. And probably the anthropomorphic vocabulary which has been chosen by artificial intelligence has probably contributed to the generally strong reaction pro or against artificial intelligence, as we will see. These reactions occurred and still occur among specialists as well as general public, and I have symbolized them by the words golem and Pygmalion. We'll see. Let me quote an interview of Lem. So the interviewer said to him, "You are famous for your neologism, which somehow miraculously lend themselves to translation. You have even included a Polish dictionary at the end of one of your books. Do your neologism and linguistic come before your ideas for action, setting up the boundaries of how you develop your stories, or do the neologisms come to you when you need them?" And Lem answers, "Neologisms happen to come up only when they become absolutely indispensable to me during the course of writing. I am unable to think up one that would carry meaning if asked to work outside of context sui generis. I really have no clue as to how this process works. Some neologisms were hell to conjure. For example, in my latest book, Fiasco, at the time, I couldn't hit upon a name for the walking machines, and for 2 years they were nameless. I tried to think up a derivative of Latin and then English, but to no avail. I finally settled in Polish on wielkoszodi, multi-steppers, macromobiles." But the use of all these words in these technological terms is an example and a proof of the universal thought of Lem, who knew everything in mathematics, information theories, system dynamics, system theory, etc. Here is a crucial remark by a critic of ST, which was, I repeat, published in English 50 years after publication in Polish. And here is the remark of the critic. "I think if Summa had been translated to English immediately after publication, some of the neologisms coined by Lem for technology that did not exist at the time would be still used today. So Google would be Ariadnology, a guide to the labyrinth of the already assembled knowledge. Virtual reality would be phantomatics. Neuroscience would be cerebromatics, and artificial intelligence would be intellectronics, as it was. In all cases, Lem imagines developments more advanced than today's technology. For example, phantomatics and cerebromatics provide full stimulation of all senses via direct neural interfaces with instant feedback loops, influencing mental processes while bypassing afferent neural pathway. The overall scope of Summa Technologiae can be characterized as cybernetics, We should add there are quite many comments about what has become artificial intelligence, a term very much in vogue in the 60s but not used much these days, defined by Norbert Wiener as the study of control and communication in machines and living beings. I should notice that the work of Wiener also relies on Shannon's information theory. One could also quote Frank Rosenblatt, the creator of the perceptron, which is the first really neural network. In his book, Principles of Neurodynamics, Perceptron and the Theory of Brain Mechanism, published in 1961, Frank Rosenblatt writes, "It is only after much hesitation that the writer has reconciled himself to the addition of the term neurodynamics to the list of such recent linguistic artifacts as cybernetics, bionics, autonomics, biomimesis, synoetics, intellectronics, and robotics. It is hoped that by selecting a term which more clearly delimits our realm of interest and indicates its relationship to traditional academic disciplines, the underlying motivation of the perceptron program may be more successfully communicated." The term perceptron, originally intended as a generic name for a variety of theoretical nerve nets, here today we would say neural networks, has an unfortunate tendency to suggest a specific piece of hardware, and it is only with difficulty that its well-meaning popularizers can be persuaded to suppress their natural urge to capitalize the initial P. On being asked, "How is perceptron performing today?" I am often tempted, Rosenblatt says, to respond, "Very well, thank you. And how are neutron and electron behaving?" Concerning Lem's exceptional life by density and production, it could be divided in 4 parts. The first part is connected with his university in Krakow that you all know, where he was introduced to cybernetics as well as starting studies as a doctor. Then the later 50s are marked by beginning of being interested and analyzing cybernetics. His book Dialogue in 1957 is an analysis of cybernetics. But cybernetics remained his love affair. Let me quote a critic: "The love affair with cybernetics and its multiplex progeny, from robotics to artificial intelligence and artificial emotion, stayed with him for life." So I mentioned already the bad success of Lem, partly at the beginning also because of the complication of the books and the difficulties of publication in Poland. Concerning the reception of Lem's non-science fiction works, one should notice the great success of his books in Germany and Russia. Millions of books in Germany, millions of books in Russia, in Soviet Union, and very few compared in Poland. We should also report that Lem was strongly criticized from 2 directions: by American Organization of Science Fiction Writers, with an affair called the Lem Affair in 1977, where he was accused by the boss of the Writers' Organization of Science Fiction. He was accused of, I quote, "finding the communist regime congenial." But at that time, one science fiction writer was supporting very strongly Lem, and it was Philip K. Dick. And Lem was also partly censored by Soviet publishing companies. Let me quote: "For dressing up cybernetics as mechanistic in the Magellan Nebula," it's a book by Lem, and that was at a time where there was a tendency in the Soviet Union to associate cybernetics with Marxist-Leninism. He even found himself in the cross sides of Stalin-era censors who, once the roux was out, briskly eliminated the seditious element from subsequent edition. In the 60s, as a lifelong member of the Polish Cybernetic Society, Lem played an active role in rehabilitating the cognitive sciences in the USSR from the effluvia of political repression. So I mention that there will be a lecture mentioning this by Beata Biels. Now let's say a few words about Summa. It is impossible to give a complete description of this great and chaotic book, whose aim was, I quote, the lofty goal of forging a secular counterpart of the 13th century Summa Theologia of Aquinas. But its futuristic and precursory vision can be seen from, for example, the report of a journalist assisting a conference in 2005, Singularity Summit. Singularity is a concept that has been applied to the future of artificial intelligence, and I will eventually give some elements of references for this. Commenting, so the critic comments that despite Lem's observation that, he quotes Lem, nothing ages as fast as the future, nearly half-century old prognostication concerned the very same topics that Lem encountered and felt just as fresh, this time in 2005. So we will, because of the messy aspect of the book, we will use some quotation from ST, in particular from chapter 4, which is named Intellectronics. It begins by subtitle, Return to Earth, with this paragraph of introduction. In this chapter, we aim to investigate whether intelligent activity that manifests itself in techno-evolution is a dynamic and permanent process, one that does not alter its expansive nature during any period, or whether it must undergo transformation until any similarity to its original state has disappeared. And it is followed by the definition of intelligence, as I tried to do in my recent book, tried to see what intelligence means. And here is a very Wienerian way of thinking of intelligence for Lem. By intelligence, we understand a second-level homeostatic regulator that is capable of coping with disturbance to its environment thanks to the activity in which it engages on the basis of the historically acquired knowledge. So here we see technical concepts coming from the theory of Wiener and also more evolutionary Darwinian way of thinking with this historically acquired knowledge. So we see a close application of this mixture which Lem is never afraid of doing. Then Lem develops a first extension with the connection of the problem of intelligence of man to the problem of intelligence of animals. Insects, I quote Lem, take up over 3/4 of the animal kingdom as a whole, yet they did not produce intelligence. They have been in existence for approximately the same period of time as vertebrates. So, from a statistical point of view, if it was to be decisive, owing to the tenfold size of their population, they should have 10 times as much chance of producing second-order regulators. The fact that this has not happened clearly demonstrates that probability calculus is not a determining criterion in psychogenesis. But then, later in the chapter, there is a second extension, which to me seems even more interesting. Of the problem of intelligence, it's considered with the evolution of intelligence in a distant future and the development of collective intelligence, which Lem identifies simply with science. And now we see the introduction of the theory of deformation, which is going to lead to some barrier for science. So I quote him, information is thus crucial to all sources of energy and to all sources of knowledge. The dramatic increase in the number of scientists since the Industrial Revolution has been caused by a phenomenon that is well known to cyberneticists. The amount of information that can be transmitted via one particular channel is restricted. Science cannot traverse this barrier. It cannot absorb the avalanche of information that is moving in its direction. The situation is rather as follows. The number of discoveries doubles 30 years, whereas the number of scientists doubles only 10 years. All the discoveries taken together are just a fraction of all the information being acquired by science. I have been struck by the fact that some of these ideas, not as well developed, appear in an interview of an old mathematician who was the creator of the Bourbaki group and very famous, very high-level mathematician, André Weil, the brother of Simon Weil. And he gives, in an interview in 1960, ideas very close to that. Reaching the limits of the information capacity of science, this is Lem talking, means significantly lowering the probability of making discoveries. What is more, as the curve of an actual increase in the number of scientists will be getting further away from the hypothetical curve of further exponential growth, which is not possible anymore, in its descent, the coefficient of such probability should be constantly decreasing from now on. I will quickly pass on the aspect concerning consciousness because consciousness is poorly treated in ST. Let me just mention this quotation from Lem again. It is an area where everything is treated superficially, where gaps and fragments of logical thinkings are hidden behind pseudo-cybernetic rhetoric, where banalities about machines that compose poems the way Shakespeare did, and nonsensical pronouncements about extraterrestrial civilization, with which it is no more difficult to communicate than it is with a neighbor across the fence, keep flourishing. It is truly difficult to navigate. But let me mention that this question of conscious of animal has been rebirthed later on with the approach introduced later on in 1970 by Thomas Nagel with the expression what it is like, starting with the well-known what it is like to be a bat and continuing with dogs, octopuses, and animal, and finishing with recently an article saying what it is like to be a robot. And we will go back to this in a minute. Golem 14, for which we will say only a few words, has the appearance of a science fiction, but it's a philosophic essay quite pessimistic on the future of technology and civilization. The hero is a supercomputer built by Pentagon in 2047. After a series of developments of new machines, it has developed competencies superior to humans and is no more interested in human military worries because he finds them illogical. Then Golem 14 acquires consciousness and becomes at such a level of intelligence. He has no more contacts with humans and develops a kind of post-humanism, which is partly the opinion of Lem, we could think. Then appears an even smarter machine. The end of the book remains open and one does not know how to stop Golem 14. So let me quote about the philosophy underlying this book, complicated to guess, this interview of a journalist with Lem. You once wrote to me that you believe a lot of what Golem says is speculation on the toposophy of superior artificial intelligence. So this corresponds to sort of what is called now in English language AGI, artificial general intelligence, can be read as a materialistic version of theosophy, a theosophy without a teleology. The development of intelligence described by Golem 14 seems to parallel the development of spiritual consciousness projected by Teilhard de Chardin, the Austrian mystic Rudolf Steiner, and others in the modern Western mystical tradition. Despite your stated dislike of mysticism and of Hegel, aren't you describing a dialectical progress of the spirit of intelligence in Golem's vision? And Lem answers, it is not one and the same to me that someone should promise people that humans will fly because they'll grow wings like angels, or promise them, as Roger Bacon did, that they will fly because they will build appropriate machines. This is why I put some faith in the conceptualizations of Golem 14, as they can be extrapolated from real successes of computer science, cybernetics, and automata theory. So we see here the heart of Lem's technique of writing and creating new ideas. It doesn't start from nothing, from emptiness. On the other hand, the writings of Teilhard de Chardin are to me but an attempt at crossing theology with biology, harmful to both, where I will be completely agreeing with Lem. To me, Steiner is just a flake. I believe in a planet mind, but I don't believe in bending spoons and keys as acts of pure will, psychokinesis. And in any case, the vision of Golem 14 ought to be taken cum grano salis. He himself cautioned that he doesn't know, but is merely supposing. I merely supposed about his suppositions. Okay, so I will say a few words about, because I have not much more time, about what we can say about Lem's influence and the possible influence he could have now that he's going, I hope, to be better known and better translated. So I will give a short but disruptive conclusion. So my claims are the following. Philosophy is useful. Reading Lem could have been useful if translations existed, or we should have learned Polish, Russian, or German, or the three of them. I said that the work of Lem was precursory. Maybe this was a little bit too strong because it needed followers. But it could be useful, extremely useful, as a medicine in a period that is lasting, where AI is subject to Golem and Pygmalion diseases, phenomena, as shown by few examples. Permanent lies about the future of AI. So this is the Pygmalion aspect, by people thinking that the sculpture AI, they fall in love with it. And this happens to specialists as well as to public people. So for them, soon the world will be perfect. There will be no more car driving by men because there will be autonomous cars. There will be no more pandemia. Everything will be perfect. AI will be God and Santa Claus together. This is the Pygmalion, what I call the Pygmalion phenomenon. And the other phenomenon, of course, this is not in Poland that I will teach you what Golem is about, but it has a part which is frightening, and the Golem, as you know, Golem is not control at some point. It's a Hebraic tradition, but it has been very popularized and even used in some artificially intelligent programs as symbols. And the typical example of the Golem phenomena is the idea that soon robots will take power and will direct the world. And of course, we see example of this and with more philosophical ideas in Lem's fiction or non-fiction books. Of course, these phenomena can be explained partly because there's a huge search for funding, which is all over the world and influences the media and the publics. So as a final remark concerning the beautiful work and life of Stanisław Lem, I will say that the encounter of philosophy, science, and literature has always existed. Of course, we need a historical report on this. But as a beautiful and recent, very recent, fascinating example of this, I advise to read the book by Nobel Prize Ishiguro. The title is Clara and the Sun, and Clara is just a conscious robot. So thank you and best wishes for your conference.